Hello, everyone. It is Fiona here, and I am once again with my friend and colleague, Fernando. Would you like to introduce yourself, Fernando?
Hello, Fiona. Thank you once again for inviting me.
Today, I wanted to catch up with you about another topic that you and I have talked about a few times, but we haven't made it the main topic. And I don't know that I'm paraphrasing this correctly, but we have been discussing the modern world, the modern view, traditional worlds, traditional views. And in all of those conversations, sometimes we come up against what I'm using for a catchphrase hook so that I remember what it is
Ah,
the being versus becoming.
yes.
Okay, I have got that correctly, but I haven't heard it before. I don't know where it comes from. I can feel inside myself that it's important, but I wanted to give some time to understanding it better. So, can you explain to me how your understanding of that, how it's
Oh,
come?
sure. Sure. So, first of all, that's not an original idea from me. That's that from mine. I mean, it's not something that I came up with. It's something that comes from the perennialist school of perennial philosophy, which is the idea that the majority of the religions of the world, the majority of the spiritual institutions of the world have a core tenet of beliefs that link them together, not from the modern perspective that some new religious groups postulate, like Baha'i or like theosophical movements. It's more of a traditional perspective in terms of that there are real truths that are the seeds of all traditional religions and philosophies in terms of spiritual philosophies more than anything else, traditional philosophies, not modern philosophy. And as a consequence, we can extrapolate truth from different places that will synchronize and will have harmony within them, right? So that pertains to the world of tradition, right? How that is tradition and how those ideas manifested themselves along history through different cultures, through different populations in different ways pertaining to their innate autochthonous essence, right? And how we have, the tradition of the West, the tradition of the East, traditions in China, India, Middle East, Europe, and so on and so forth, right? So that pertains to a kind of world which is called the traditional world, which is the world where you have a center, which are metaphysical principles of transcendence in terms of man is here in the sublunar sphere of the four elements, to put it from an Aristotelian point of view, and we are here, we are in the world, and the world is the center. The world is, which comes into mind, which comes to some people into mind, the idea of geocentrism, right? We are here, we are here, and everything moves around us, so we are in a place, right? And everything in that society surrounds revolves around the metaphysical ideas of surviving, of saving your soul, of achieving moksha, of reaching heaven, right? The idea of going up a ladder, of going up a divine chain of being, right? Which connects the world to different spheres, different levels, both going up and down, right? And you have to live a certain way, you have to follow certain rituals, you have to follow certain certain rites in order to achieve that. And that is the organic way of living, that is the organic way in which man has expressed himself through different civilizations and cultures throughout time, through different parts of the world, right? But about 200 something years ago, with strength, but more than anything else in the Western context, after the 16th century, more or less, you start seeing something new, something that, well, that's the modern perspective, that it's new, but it's not necessarily new. It's something that has always been there. It's the idea that we can do better, right? The idea of changing things, of just not being in a place and just expanding, right? And looking for new things, right? And moving ourselves and just letting go of all the epistemology that is not capable of being grasped through our senses, that is not being capable of being experimented, of being putting through the test through our five senses and our mind, right? And that's where you have the great divorce between what, for example, astronomy and astrology is, alchemy and chemistry is, and all that. And then you have the scientific revolutions of the 17th and 18th centuries, and you start seeing the development of the modern world. And that's the difference from the traditional world. It's a world where the metaphysical principles are no longer the center of society. The center now are purely humanistic principles from the most vulgar point of view, right? It's the idea of man being, separated from that divine chain of being that connects them to God and also connects them to the depths of Hades, or hell, however you want to call it. And at the same time, people are just relegated. They are separated from those principles. Now the principles are purely humanistic, they're purely materialistic, they're even purely economical, and now everything in society surrounds around that, right? And that became the norm with more strength after the late 18th century, early 19th century, which was more or less 200 and something years ago. Now, in modernity, you are not in a place, right? With the imposition of the heliocentric model, the sun is the center. So the world is no longer the center. The world is just something that is, giving, yeah, that's just revolving around the sun, which at the same time is revolving around the galaxy, which at the same time is just moving in a vacuum of space with no reason, with no logic, with no purpose, right? That's more or less the modern perspective. Now, even though this might be real from a materialistic point of view, from a spiritual point of view, it presents really big problems to man, right? And its essence and his being. So having that, and at the same time having also all the revolutionary movements that are purely secular, historical, materialistic, and even atheistic, you start seeing the rise of modernity, where these precepts of humanism, of materialism, become the center of society. And as a consequence, you have the modern world, where everything is about improving, everything is about becoming, everything is about progress, evolution. When in the traditional world, that was called barbarism, that was called decadence, right? The idea of the people that want more and more and more, but they don't know where they're going, which would be like an analogy of modern society, right? So even though tradition was never relegated to oblivion, it was substituted as the main, it was substituted by modernity as the main ethos of how society was constructed. And then with globalization, that spread throughout the world. And now we're living in a modern world where everything is, becoming, right? We have all these revolutions, all these precepts, philosophical precepts that are being put henceforth, which are purely secular. And at the same time, we have different crises that were not present in previous centuries. We have a demographic crisis, we have an ecological crisis, we have a spiritual crisis, we have, crises of all sorts that were not there before, right? And at the same time, we have, in the backdrop, this idea of the whole technocratic state rising up slowly, which we're going to see during this 21st century with what some people call the fourth industrial revolution, which is the new paradigms in terms of that becoming. So from that brief summary, you start realizing the differences between being and becoming, right? The traditional man is, right? He is within a specific ethos that anchors him to a firm position where he knows where he is, right? He knows where he is. I mean, he in the Indian context, well, you follow the Vedas, you do your sacrifices, you know your place in society, in the Varnas, you're either a Brahmana, Kshatriya, a Vaishya, a Shudra, you do what you got to do, you do your penitence, you do your puyas, you do your tapas, you do your praying, and then you die, right? And hopefully you will achieve moksha or you will reincarnate. The same thing with the West, You are born, you're baptized, you follow the commandments, you do your sacrifices, you marry, you pray the rosary, you go to church, you try to be a good human being, and then you die and hopefully you go to heaven. Right? And that's more or less how all societies express themselves throughout history until very recently, right? Where this idea of modernity, which is really barbarism, has become the norm, right? Has become the norm, which is basically primitivism, but obviously with certain perks, right? Without a doubt, there have been really positive things about modern society, specifically the technological advancements. But those technological advancements have also brought difficulties from a spiritual perspective. At the same time, other crises in terms of, demographics, ecology, and that sort of stuff. So that put aside, the idea is that the modern man is not that traditional man. The modern man does not follow that ethos. That the modern man does not have a place where he's standing. He's constantly moving, right? And that's why we had the different revolutions that we've had. And actually, you can see that through a metaphor or analogy, better said, through the caste system and how that expressed itself in the West and then through globalization spread throughout the world. The idea of how in the early modern era, which would be like the 15th, 16th century, you see how the monarchies of Europe separate themselves from the Pope, right? How the Kshatriyas separate from the Pope, and how they become more independent with the rise of mercantilism, the rise of usury, how they start being more secular, how we start seeing these movements towards constitutional monarchies, which are purely humanistic. Then, and also you have to see before that the developments of the Protestant Revolution and also the developments of the Renaissance and how that was the preamble to this. Then you see with more strength in the late 18th, early 19th century, the revolutions that came upon with the French Revolution, which would be more the revolution of the third state in France, how the Vaishya separate from the Kshatriyas, how the bourgeoisie separates from the monarchies. They kill the monarchies, right? In France specifically. They also did that in England before, but that's another story for another time. But the idea is that they start going against that Kshatriya order, and you have the rule of the bourgeoisie. And then after that, they obviously oppress the workers, and there are very significant injustices to the workers of the European countries during the 19th century. And you have the rise of socialism, and after that, communism, which would be the revolution of the Shudras going against the Vaishyas. And then after that, you have the First World War, the Second World War, which was more or less an impetus of trying to stop all that started with strength in the late 18th century, right? The predominant academics do not see it like that from a traditional perspective. It's like that, and the people who won were the revolutionary movements from modernity, right? You have the the star group, as they say, that won, the idea of the star of the capitalist and the star of the communist, which allude to the revolution of the third state in the early 19th century and the revolutions of the late 19th and early 20th century that are the communists. So you have that going on in the world of on the world of the post-war world, and now we see that everything is just becoming very Shudra like, very slave like, and there's always a becoming, right? There's always a revolutionary movement, and now we're seeing how these what's the word I'm looking for, these topics, these themes of the post-war are just evaporating in the 20th and 21st century with the coming fourth industrial revolution, where it's no longer going to be something about the right and left. It's probably going to be something about bioconservatism and transhumanist liberalism. The idea of, wait, we're human beings, we have to be human beings, we cannot become machines. And the people are going to say, no, 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 we can become machines, we can have robotic implants. And that is more or less an educated guess of where things are going right now. And after that, in the following centuries, there are going to be other movements, but you cannot make that educated prediction based on what we have right now. You can see to the future, or you can more or less predict the future with the things you have now, but those are very way off in the future. But the thing is that through this small outline that I just gave you, this small chronology, you can see through history what this becoming in terms of the modern mentality has done to humanity, right? And how it has just gone through everything as a tsunami of history. How it spread to the east and basically transformed the east in a couple of decades, in a century, while it took like several centuries to transform in Europe. And now in a globalized world, the global village, then it's that there is the norm, right? And that's the idea of becoming and being, right? In the traditional world, there was no such thing as that. There were empires and that sort of stuff, but they were traditional empires. They were based on religion. They were based on metaphysical principles. Now the empires of the world are not based in that. They're based in crude material stuff. They're based on numbers. They're based on technocratic edicts and that sort of stuff. So that is the crisis of the modern world where we're in right now, and it stems mainly from this metaphor of being and becoming. And I mean, and at the same time, you're seeing this impetus of the war against death, right? The idea of people who are just postulating now the idea of becoming immortal, right? The idea of becoming, not dying either by transporting your consciousness to a machine, or being part of a machine. And that's going to be the topics that we're going to be dealing with this coming 21st century, in my opinion, right? And I've given this outline, but in order for people to understand the ideas of being and becoming, and what the traditional man and the modern man, or the traditional world and the modern world differ. So I guess I don't know if I explained myself. I hope I did. So I
Thank
I,
you,
I hope.
Fernando. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes. You gave us a great overview of a lot of historical context.
yeah.
Um, but I would like to understand it better. So now I have questions. Um, so this is what's hard as a modern person. One projects oneself into a traditional person, but it seems to me that when one was uh, in that metaphysical model, one potentially was still ambitious to try to evolve to heaven
Yeah,
faster, or to get closer
yeah,
to God or whatever,
yeah,
or to not have to reincarnate again. So therefore, I'm going to be becoming. But am I just imposing my modern mind on a more traditional mind?
no,
Because
no.
for me, it seems that in those societies, like being an Egyptian something, or being a Chinese, practicing something, back in these traditional worlds, there would have been a percentage of those people who wanted to improve and were actively trying to get better in order to not reincarnate, or to
Yeah,
to raise their position in the afterlife. Do
yeah.
you see that that was still becoming?
Oh yeah, definitely within the traditional context, of course.
Yeah.
That is the thing. It was the salvation of your soul.
Yes. Yes.
Definitely.
So then,
Now the thing is, how many people are thinking about that now? of the salvation of your soul, right? They're just thinking about materialistic stuff, which is understandable, right? I mean, materialism is very important, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the most important thing either. It's the idea of how the idea is that from the traditional perspective, this life we're living in this world is just temporary, and the thing that matters is what comes afterwards, because this is like a trial, right? But I mean, I'm simplifying it, but that's the idea. Of course, that there were people who were aware that they need to become something, because that is life. I mean, life from the personal perspective, it's temporary. It's gonna end, and death is the only sure thing. Now, in the modern world, we're trying to avoid death. That's why we're trying to become immortal, which is a mortal sin to a certain degree. And at the same time, people have taken that idea of becoming within that metaphysical uh, that those metaphysical parameters, and have extrapolated to what the material world is, because the same system puts it such, right? There's no emphasis on trying to be a better person to save yourself. Of course, there is an emphasis from a legal point of view of following certain laws and being an educated citizen, right? So those things are still there, but they're like a facsimile of what the traditional world was, and to a certain degree, everything is in the modern world. It's just like a facsimile of the traditional um, order of things, which would be like the organic world. Now, there are positive things to the modern world, which is, I mean, all the tools we've developed, without a doubt, which is our technology, right? But now we're just becoming victim of our tools slowly, which has to do with
Yeah.
the idea of not being firmly standing up in order to know where the lines are drawn, right? Because that's a very difficult thing. The idea is that in traditional world, objectivity was very strong, while in the modern world, subjectivity is very strong. And when subjectivity is very strong, you don't know where things start and when they end, so you don't know where you're standing, and hence the idea of constantly becoming, and the problems that inevitably will arise from there. And don't get me wrong, from an objective point of view, in the traditional perspective, there are also other obstacles. So, but that pertain to the human condition, which is something more philosophical than anything else. But yeah,
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many
layers. Yeah.
to pull apart here, because also, I mean, there's a lot of people who can participate in life now because there's less restrictions on who can
Yeah.
participate. Not that there's no restrictions, but in a more traditional model, as we talked about, like there was a caste system where you
Yep.
couldn't operate beyond your caste, or you couldn't operate beyond your gender. We're currently dealing with you can't operate beyond the color of your skin. So
But the color of the skin is something modern, you know. The color of the skin is something that has to do with biological predeterminisms. It's not necessarily, does not pertain to the traditional world. In the traditional world, it was more, what do you believe in, your religion, right? The idea of looking at the material of how the light reflects into your skin is very modern. Actually, it pertains mainly to the 19th century more than anything else, which is something that most people don't realize, because at the same time there wasn't a lot of availability in terms of travel. Hence, those differences were not very visible until the 16th century with the discovery of the New World. And actually, Spaniards and Catholics did not necessarily see that at the beginning of the conquest. The Protestants did, which is also something that has to do with that dichotomy of Catholicism and Protestantism. But yeah, I mean, what you're saying, everything you're saying is totally correct. Yeah.
Yep. And I mean, I have to say that
And it's very controversial.
yeah, I'm in Portugal, so we have a history of exploration, and
Yeah.
I do agree that the conquest didn't see color; they saw faith, and they
Yeah.
were there as long as I can get you to believe in God. It
I
doesn't matter
baptize,
what color
exactly.
you
Yeah.
are. But at the same time, we were a very significant trader of slaves, so we did see some people in human bodies as being
Yeah.
commodities that could be sold, and other people in human bodies were not commodities and they couldn't be sold.
Yeah.
Um,
But that is a modern, that is a modern development, right? And at the same time, it's the interpretation of the modern academia, because what they don't tell you is that those slaves that they bought in the coast of Africa were first enslaved by other African tribes, right? So it's like Africans enslaving other Africans in order to sell them first to the Muslims, which were the biggest slavers, the Turks specifically speaking. And actually there's still slavery in Saudi Arabia, but we're not going to talk about that. But that's all part of this mod, because that came upon more than that became more prevalent during the beginnings of the modern age more than anything else. Slavery always existed, and slavery will always exist. And actually, we can make a case that we are slaves to a certain degree in modern society, due to the fact that if you don't have money and you don't work, you're not gonna be able to do your things. And in socialist countries, well, basically you are the landlord is the state, which would be the same as, you know, a man who has a farm and has houses for their slaves. Of course, it's very simplistic in the way I'm putting it, but going back to what you're saying, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You know, all that you're saying is truth. That's why
Yes.
it's very controversial. Yeah.
Yes, but and so this brings us back then to that there is this propensity inside the human being to improve and to
Yes.
become,
Yes.
regardless of traditional or modern. But then in astrology, we have this opportunity to acknowledge what we are, or to be what we are, because the chart gives us a chance to see how the foundation of our lifetime was set.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that is what we are, as in
Mm-hmm.
be, rather than what we're becoming. And how can we powerfully use astrology to be rather than be distracted by becoming?
By accepting the chart, I guess.
Yeah,
Accepting what you are. I mean, accepting your positions, and at the same time, you know, in the case of the chart, there is a dance between your destiny and your free will. However, your free will function within the parameters of your destiny. Now, there are people who say that destiny is absolute, and people say that free will is absolute. You know, I believe that they're both there, and some people have told me, well, that means you believe in destiny. Yes, but free will has a place to go within those parameters. So
absolutely.
you
And
have to
that's a conversation for another day too.
yeah, you have to accept your chart. You have to
Yeah, to
accept your
accept your
chart.
chart. And you know, we got to this in the end of the last video. When I hear this, it reminds me of Jupiter, which I think we said this in the last video. Jupiter is bliss. You might not be happy, but you're in bliss. But Jupiter gets starved by Venus when Venus is wanting and asking and wanting desires to be satisfied. When Venus is in that position for Jupiter, Jupiter is abundant and gives to Venus, even at the detriment of wisdom.
Yeah.
So do you see that also, that part of this being, becoming thought concept that we've been speaking about, do you think it fits with the Jupiter being starved by Venus?
Oh, actually, that's a very interesting question because it has to do a lot with the polarities more than anything else, I guess, with feminine and masculine, which you have just said there with Jupiter and Venus. It and also has to do with the idea of how you know, the emancipation of women has also brought about a lot of problems within the modern world. No no offense, but it is a problem in terms of how that alters the order of things, which is very well put through the starvation of Venus, the starvation of Jupiter from Venus, right? The idea of how Venus will affect that Jupiter, how that femininity will affect the traditional law, the religion, the spirituality that Jupiter gives, but at the same time, Jupiter will deal with it. It's like, you know, the priest with the woman, right? How and not necessarily a devout woman, but a sort of mundane woman, not in the bad sense, but just a woman that's not necessarily religiously inclined, but just more mundanely inclined towards her likings and all that. So yeah, I mean, that is a good analogy to present it, right? They both give good things, but if they're together, then there are difficulties. Now, you know, a good dignified Venus will not necessarily do that, and a good dignified Jupiter will understand that, right? So we have
Of
to
course.
graduate those things a little bit, but in principle, I think that is a good analogy.
Yes, and then I think it invites us to think about something that you mentioned on a previous video about astrology being created, or no, astrology being encoded through men or through priestly men,
Yeah.
that these concepts that come from astrology, like Venus starving Jupiter, come through the concept of a man's perspective. And it invites us to think about how do these energies work well together? How are they in balance, and how are they complementary to humanity or supportive of humanity rather than starved as they are in that particular Lajatati Vashta when they're in the right placement. So an invitation for reflection on
they come from the experience, not only the perspective but the experience of man, and I experience that modern man can have in terms of how women manifest themselves in the current world, and the inevitable differences that exist between men and women, which goes against the ideas of equality, liberty, and fraternity that are the laws. I mean, the sacred laws of our system. That's modernity right there. The idea that we're all equal, when that is not so, and that has never been so, and that can never be so unless we are all cyborgs or robots or that sort of thing, which is where we're heading.
Perfect, Fernando. Good. So we're solving that problem. That's wonderful. All right. So then when you work with people, to wrap up, when you work with people, would you characterize your work with people is that you help them orientate themselves to what they are in the chart?
I just tell them what I interpret, right? As an astrologer, that's your job. You just interpret them. Now, after that, then you have to take your hat off and become a counselor, right? So I just tell them what I read, and that's what an astrologer should do. When I started, I really wanted to, like, we say here, stick it, say things that are true and that are gonna become true, and giving predictions that I hope. But then with time, I just you can't hold on to that. You just got to read and interpret it, and
Yeah.
then function on a question basis. That's also very good for the client. And after that, you have to tell them what I told you. You have to accept these things, and uh there's nothing you can do beyond those parameters, right?
Absolutely. Because I think I mean, it's one of the things that I find most profound about astrology is accepting the lay of the land. For myself and for anyone who comes to talk to me about astrology, it's like an enormous relief when one accepts the truth of what one has been battling against energetically.
Oh yeah. Oh,
um,
especially when they don't know it, and they hear it for the first time. Oh, definitely, yeah.
yeah, but mostly I find that that's very affirming or confirming for clients. They're like,
Oh
yes,
yeah,
that's my experience. But then what I love doing in my work is finding in that reality, like when we accept the lay of the land, let's look for, where is the flow in this chart? Where is the joy in the chart? Where is the purpose? Where's the energy, the passion, the motivation? Depends how the chart is laid out. For each person's, zest and zing is going to be a bit different. But when we accept the lay of the land, that's when we can look for where the joy is in that chart. So I would say that that's how I like to work with my clients.
Yeah, and joy is always going to be there, but joy is not necessarily going to be the most abundant thing in the chart most of a lot of the times, but
Yeah,
there's always something there. There's always something positive.
something
Yeah.
there. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful, Fernando. Thank you.
But at the
Oh
same
yes,
time,
a final
there's
thought.
always something positive there, but sometimes it's not what the person wants,
Yes.
which is the problem sometimes. Like I want to have relationships, but your chart does not show that. The chart shows that you're gonna have a good job. Yeah, but I have a good job, and at the same time, people that say, well, I want to have a good job, but your chart does not show that. What it shows is that you're going to have good relationships. Yeah, but I have good relationships and all that, and that has to do more with the human nature than anything else.
Absolutely.
And that is the idea of acceptance, right? And those things are very common. But yeah.
Yeah, but no, but I think it's really good that you've brought that up, that of course we don't come to an astrologer for the things that are working really well. And it is, I think, an astrologer, or potentially the way you and I are astrologers, we have the chance to hear that suffering of, I want, and insert here whatever it is that's missing from your life experience. I think an astrologer can hear that suffering, hear the depth of it,
Yeah.
and face it in a way that maybe other peers or colleagues or whatever cannot, because we're in a society where we divert people from what is causing them suffering. And I think an astrologer can look at that and go, yeah, that is right there. That's exactly what it looks like. That's what it feels like. This is when it's happening the most. But it's from that place of communion that, you know, a new action can come. But until someone gets to communion, it's hard.
That's why we're kind of priests. Yeah.
Kind of priest.
Yeah.
Great. Fernando, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your broad experience, your philosophical content.
I wouldn't say broad experience, but yeah, thank you.
It's wonderful to chat with you, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Sure. Thank you, Fiona, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.